Welcome to Think Outside the Box, a deep dive. And this one's for all of you in Teacher Victoria's ESL class. Today we're going to be looking at something that a lot of language learners kind of get caught up on, and that is, what's the difference between accent and pronunciation?
Yeah, it's a really common question. And I think it's because, people kind of get stuck on this idea of like, well, if I'm learning a language, shouldn't I try to sound exactly like a native speaker?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you kind of want to blend in and not feel like you're standing out.
Exactly. And I think especially for folks who are learning English as a second language, there's this kind of pressure to assimilate and sound like everyone else. But the research actually suggests that might not be the most effective way to go about it.
Oh, really? That's interesting because, I mean, I guess like growing up, that's what you do. You kind of, mimic your parents and the people around you.
Yeah, and for acquiring your first language, that definitely plays a role. But when it comes to learning a second language, things get a little more complicated.
Okay, I'm curious to hear more about this. So what is the distinction then between accent and pronunciation?
Okay, so think of it this way. Pronunciation is all about producing the individual sounds of a language accurately. So it's like, hitting the right notes on a piano.
Oh, okay, so it's the mechanics of it.
Exactly. And accent, on the other hand, is more about the overall melody, the rhythm and intonation that you bring to your speech. So it's influenced by your native language, your regional background, and even your personal style.
Okay, so pronunciation is like the foundation, making sure you've got the building blocks right, and then accent is the personal touch you add on top.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that researchers like Monroe and Derwing and Jenkins, they've actually found that sometimes this striving for a native-like accent can actually hinder your overall language progress.
That's so counterintuitive. Like, why would that be?
Well, imagine you're so focused on getting every vowel perfectly rounded that you neglect expanding your vocabulary or mastering grammar. It's like trying to bake a cake and only focusing on the frosting while forgetting the flour and eggs.
Right, it's like missing the bigger picture for all the tiny details.
Exactly, and it can also impact your confidence. If you're constantly worried about your accent, you might be less likely to actually speak up and practice.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if you're self-conscious, you're not going to want to put yourself out there.
Right, and the more comfortable you feel with pronunciation, the more confident you'll be in communicating, regardless of your accent.
So for our friends in Teacher Victoria's ESL class, don't be afraid to make mistakes and to keep practicing.
Absolutely. And think about this. If you're in a situation where you need to communicate clearly, like let's say you're in a business negotiation.
Oh yeah, high stakes.
Exactly. And you mispronounce a crucial number, that small slip up could lead to a huge misunderstanding and even jeopardize the entire deal.
Wow, so it really can have real world consequences.
Absolutely. So clear pronunciation is key for ensuring that your message is understood, especially in those high pressure situations.
But what about situations where maybe someone has a really strong accent?
Yeah.
And it is making it difficult to understand what they're saying.
Yeah, that's where the concept of accent reduction comes in. But it's important to understand what accent reduction is and what it isn't. It's not about erasing your accent completely.
Okay, so it's not about trying to sound like someone you're not.
Exactly. It's more about smoothing out any pronunciation bumps that might cause confusion.
Oh, so it's like fine-tuning an instrument to make sure it's playing beautifully and clearly.
Precisely. And remember, just like we talked about with mimicking native speakers, accent reduction is a personal choice, not a requirement for effective communication.
So it's all about finding that balance between communicating clearly and still retaining the uniqueness of your voice.
Exactly, and celebrating the diversity of accents that exist in the world.
This is some really good stuff to think about for all of you listening in Teacher Victoria's ESL class. Remember, if you have any questions about this or anything else, you can always reach out to her. She's an amazing resource.
Absolutely. And we'll be right back after a short break to continue exploring this fascinating relationship between accent and pronunciation. So welcome back to Think Outside the Box, a deep dive. And as you know, we're talking about accent and pronunciation. And before the break, we were kind of digging into this idea that accent reduction can be helpful, but it's not like this necessary thing that everyone has to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting how sometimes this idea of striving for a perfectly native accent can actually be kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, you think about it like language learning. It's like this big juggling act, right? You've got pronunciation, you've got vocabulary, grammar fluency, all these different balls in the air. And if you're so hyper-focused on just one of those balls, like perfecting your accent, you might end up dropping the others.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier about the cake. It's like if you're just focused on the frosting and you forget the flour and eggs, well, then you don't have a very good cake.
Exactly. And I think the important thing to remember is that, like, the ultimate goal of language learning, it's not to become some kind of like carbon copy of a native speaker. Your unique accent is part of what makes you you, and it's something to be celebrated.
It's interesting too, because I think when you embrace your accent and you see it as part of your identity, it actually helps you feel more confident when you're speaking.
Absolutely. It's like you're owning who you are, and that confidence comes through in your communication.
But I do want to acknowledge that there are those situations where, like, pronunciation does really matter. Like if you're, trying to order food at a noisy restaurant and the waiter just can't understand you because you have a thick accent, it can be frustrating for everyone involved.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where, accent reduction can be a really helpful tool. But again, it's important to approach it with sensitivity. It's not about forcing everyone to sound the same. It's about providing options for people who want to refine their pronunciation for clearer communication.
And if you are one of those people in Teacher Victoria's ESL class who's thinking about, maybe working on accent reduction or just improving your pronunciation in general, remember, she's an incredible resource. So don't be shy about reaching out to her.
Definitely. And as we kind of move toward the end of our deep dive here today, I think it's good to recap what are the main takeaways? What do we really want listeners to walk away with from this conversation about accent and pronunciation?
Well, I think it really comes down to this: pronunciation is essential for clarity as meant.
Yeah.
Accents are cool, and accent reduction is a choice, not a requirement.
Beautifully said. And whether you're a seasoned language learner or you're just starting out, your voice matters. Embrace your unique sound and communicate with confidence.
And for all of you in Teacher Victoria's ESL class, if you're feeling stuck or discouraged, just remember, she's there to support you. Reach out to her with any questions or thoughts. And we'll be right back after a short break to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of accent and pronunciation. All right, so we're back for the final part of Think Outside the Box, a deep dive. And, as we wrap up this conversation about accent and pronunciation, I just wanted to leave everyone in Teacher Victoria's ESL class with kind of a final thought, something to really think about.
Yeah, I think this has been a really great discussion, and I hope everyone listening has gained some valuable insights into this topic. It's something that a lot of people have questions about, and it's often misunderstood. So.
Yeah, definitely. And throughout this episode, we've talked about a lot of different things, like the importance of clear pronunciation and how that really helps with effective communication, and then also just embracing the beauty of accents.
Yeah.
And how they're really something to celebrate, not to be ashamed of.
Absolutely. And of course, we touched on accent reduction as well, as a tool that some people might find helpful. But again, it's a choice, not a requirement.
Right. And speaking of choices and resources and all that, remember, if you have any questions about any of this, you can always reach out to Teacher Victoria. She's an amazing teacher, and she's there to help you.
For sure. And as we sign off here, I want to leave you with a little challenge, something to kind of ponder as you continue on your language learning journey. So think back to a time when you heard someone speaking and their accent really stood out to you.
Like maybe it was a conversation you had with a stranger, or a lecture you attended, or even just a story that a friend told you.
Exactly. And what was it about their accent that caught your attention? Did it make their words more interesting? Did it make you curious about their background? Maybe it even created a connection that you wouldn't have felt otherwise.
I think sometimes we get so caught up in, trying to sound perfect that we forget about the power and the beauty of just different ways of speaking. Accents can transport us to different places, introduce us to new cultures, help us see the world from a different perspective.
So here's the challenge. Embrace the diversity of accents, listen with an open mind and an appreciative heart, and you might be surprised by what you discover.
And don't forget, your own accent is a gift. It's a part of who you are, and it deserves to be celebrated. Don't be afraid to share it with the world.
This has been Think Outside the Box, a deep dive, a special episode designed for all of you in Teacher Victoria's ESL class. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of accent and pronunciation.
And as always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Teacher Victoria. Happy learning, everyone.